Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Penn Vicarage on this beautiful Tuesday morning. Lovely to see you. So glad you could join us for our Bible talk this morning. Now, thank you for letting me do these talks because I'm really enjoying doing them. And I think one of the things I like most about it is that we start at the beginning of a Bible book and we work our way through to the end, which means that we get the whole lot. We get the good, the bad, and the ugly. We get the bits that we like, and we also get the bits that we have to engage with and we can struggle with as well. And personally, I think it's really good because the temptation so much is to just pick the bits that we like and miss out the bits that we don't and not engage with those. And this morning's reading, as I say, is a knotty one. But I think it's really important that we actually hear what these texts say, learn from them, and actually, as I say, we can really grow in God and really engage with the difficult bits as well as the nice bits, the easy bits. So without further ado, I'm going to put my hard hat on and pick my shield up, and I'm going to read to you 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 to 7. Here goes. Brace yourselves. Wives, in the same way, accept the authority of your husbands, so that, even if some of them do not obey the word, they may be won over without a word by their wives' conduct, when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. Do not adorn yourselves outwardly by braiding your hair and by wearing gold ornaments or fine clothing. Rather, let your adornment be the inner self with the lasting beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in God's sight. It was in this way long ago that the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves by accepting the authority of their husbands. Thus Sarah obeyed Abraham and called him Lord. You have become her daughters as long as you do what is good and never let fears alarm you. Husbands, in the same way, show consideration for your wives in your life together, paying honour to the woman as the weaker sex, since they too are also heirs of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing may hinder your prayers. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, this morning's reading, it jars rather, doesn't it, to modern ears. And this morning does feel a bit like an act of biblical escapology, but I'll give it my best shot, because actually I think there's some fantastic stuff to be learned from this if we could just engage with it. I think we have to understand really what Peter is really aiming for. I think Peter's first aim in the whole book is to win people for Jesus Christ. I think that's Peter's main aim. I think he knows Jesus, he knew Jesus, and he wants other people to know Jesus too. And he wants people to help people to know Jesus too. Now, I think one of the hardest things to do is to try and win your family over for Jesus. You see, at church or at work, we can look tremendously holy, and we can look very godly, and we can look the part, outside the home. But the problem is, however holy we may look outside the home, our family, our children, our partners, they know what we're really like, don't they? They know what we're like behind the wheel of a car. They know what we're like when we're frustrated, we've had a bad night, and we're around the breakfast table. They know what we're really like. And whilst, as I say, we can look tremendously holy with some wonderful words, clever and profound words, and the way we speak to people can be raised to, our families know what we're really like. And what Peter's talking here, he's talking to wives, but I think the point is more of a generic one really, is that by good conduct is the way to win our families over. Not by just saying fancy words, but by walking the walk as well as talking the talk. By being Christian and not just talking Christian. That's the way to win our families over. Not just by telling them about Jesus all the time in the hope that one day they'll respond to it, but actually by being good people. By, as I say, walking the walk as well as talking the talk. By being good wives, but also by being good husbands. By being good parents. That is the way, I think, to win our families over for Jesus. Not just by clever words or by going on about it all the time, but by being sincere and being true to it. That, I think, is the way to win. I think that's the point Peter's trying to make here, really, in the whole book, really, is win people over for Jesus, but do it by being good and by being sincere. That's the first thing. I think the other thing is right at the end. He talks about nothing getting in the way of your prayers. Jesus came as our great high priest so that we can be friends with God. And I think Peter wants us to enjoy that friendship with God. But despite what you might think from this morning's reading, Peter was himself a married man. Paul may have been, we don't know, but Peter definitely was a married man. We know that because Paul mentions the fact that Peter takes a wife around with him. So Peter, despite what you might think, Peter was himself a married man. And Peter, therefore, will have known, I suspect, what family strife can feel like and how it can be it can be very, very all-consuming. And what Peter's saying here, I think, is about showing consideration to each other to try and avoid family strife. Family strife is very antagonistic. It gets you to the core. And actually, when you're in the middle of conflict and so on, it can be very, very difficult to pray. And Peter doesn't want anything to get in the way of prayers, he says at the very end of this. So Peter wants good family relationships. He says, honor and show consideration to your wives, he says to the husbands, so that nothing may inhibit your prayers. So what Peter wants here, I think, is good family life, healthy, wholesome, non-strife family life, so that prayers can be easier to do. So I think the first thing Peter's saying this morning is all about using conduct to win over your families, because at the end of the day, they know what we're really like. And secondly, he's saying here, he wants good family relationships, showing consideration to one another in order that good family relations can be maintained, and that people's minds are on God rather than necessarily on covering the back all the time and being worried constantly about family strife. If they can be have their minds uninhibited, they can have easier time in their prayers. But despite all that, it still does come across as rather sexist and old-fashioned, doesn't it? Well, I suppose I want to say just two or three things about that. He talks about showing to wives, you show honour and respect to your husbands. But actually, in the same way, we're also supposed to show honour and respect to church leaders, to the emperor and various other things. But it does not mean slavish obedience. Let's be honest, there were times when the Christians didn't obey their leaders and so on. And to say I obey orders is not enough. There are times actually when if someone's trying to lead you into sin, then you have to not do it, if you see what I mean. So it doesn't say slavish obedience. It talks about showing respect for and showing submission to, which is not the same as slavish obedience. That's the first thing. Secondly, about the way it reads is it's actually both ways. Sure, she is supposed to submit to her husband, but he's supposed to show consideration to her. And let's not forget, this was written 2,000 years ago, at a time when women had no rights at all. So the fact that Peter even suggests the idea that he might show consideration to her is actually quite radical itself. But thirdly, and here's a speculation, I don't know this, but we do know from the book that Christians were coming under criticism. And actually, Paul, in his book to the Galatians, talks about there being neither male nor female, slave nor free, and so on. And I even wonder if one of the things, and that's so unbelievably radical, I wonder if one of the things the Christians were being criticised was undermining family life. And I wonder if Peter's third motivation in this, apart from winning people for Jesus and wanting good family life so as not to inhibit prayers, I wonder if the third thing is to come against the criticism that they were undermining family life, because what the Christians were suggesting was so radical. But that's the thought. So, tricky passage this morning. I've given it my best shot, but I do think what Peter's saying here, we can learn definitely, is that Peter is saying that the way to win over people close to us is not just by fancy words, but by walking the walk with Jesus and by being really good. And that is the way to win our families over, not just by clever words, because our families know what we're really like. Secondly, Peter wants us all to show consideration to one another, so our family life can be good and peaceful, so as not to stand in the way of our prayers. And as regards whether this is sexist or not, you can read it yourself, because it does rather jar to us. Firstly, it says submit, not slavishly obey, and there's a huge difference there. Secondly, it is both ways, and that was actually really, really radical in those days. And thirdly, my speculation, and it is a speculation, but that's worth it's a point you can have a discussion about if you want to, is whether what the Christians were suggesting was so radical that they were being criticised for it. And what Peter's saying here is the Christian faith upholds, not undermines, family and societal and the foundation of society and marriage and that sort of stuff as well. Few thoughts for you. Tricky